to be declared?
Chair, I do have a conflict with the IO.
Right. Okay, thank you. And I think, Chris, you would be in the same position, correct?
Correct. Thank you.
Okay, so those are a conflict on that particular matter. So again, just by way of opening remarks, thank you everybody for joining the virtual meeting. I'd like to thank our government partners for their participation and for their ongoing support of Waterfront Toronto. Our meeting is being conducted via electronic conference facilities to help contain the spread of COVID-19. I know that we're all getting a little frustrated and tired of this process, but we're hoping for a time when we can get together in person. As I said to someone the other day, there's light at the end of the tunnel. The tunnel may be a bit long. However, we will continue to meet virtually until we're sure it's safe for all concerned. And the open session of this meeting is being recorded and will be made available for public viewing in accordance with our current practices. Now, we do have a bit of a long agenda today and a lot of important items, so I appreciate everybody's patience. And for those who didn't hear me before we began, we'll have a bit of a break just after we move into a closed session. Before we start, I just wanted to say, when I look back over the last year and where we were this time last year, I'm very proud of the way the board came together. When I look last December, we were struggling with our friends at Sidewalk, and then we went into the pandemic. And I also want to thank staff, everyone, for a tremendous job that you've done over the last year. It's been seamless the way you've transferred to the video and kept the corporation going. It's really been quite successful and quite an accomplishment. So again, my hat tip to you, and thank you for all that. I also at this point want to thank Maz. I assume you're on the line, Maz?
Yes, thank you.
This is Maz's last board meeting. And Maz, I personally want to thank you for your time, your wisdom, your guidance, and your friendship. You've made an invaluable contribution to this board, and you will be sincerely missed. Later on in the agenda, and so I thank you. We can all bang our table.
Here, 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 here.
And
Indeed.
And later on in the agenda, there will be a motion. I've asked Jack Winberg to chair the IREC committee, and based on a signing bonus, he's agreed. So we will.
Is it retroactive? Because I'd like mine.
Hold on, I'll note that.
So we'll get to that later on in the agenda. And you know, just another comment before we start. You know, there's a Chinese proverb that says that every successful journey of 1,000 miles, you know, starts with a single step. And while I don't think we're right at the beginning, in terms of where we're headed on one of our major projects, both with where we're going with the Portlands and where we're going with Quayside and developing a post-pandemic proposal, I'm actually very excited that we're heading to a situation with something that is better suited, more appropriate, and something that will be equally, if not more exciting and innovative than what we had before, which we'll discuss a little more in camera. So I think we should be very happy with where we're headed. So after that, we'll go to the first item that is on the agenda, that officially we have to approve the minutes of the open session of the October 8th board meeting. So can I ask Maz and Jeannie to move those? And is any discussion?
None.
Okay, all in favor? So now we're going to go through the next matter is the CEO report. I did skip over the consent agenda. I apologize. And other than the minutes, does anybody want to say anything at this point about anything that was, I guess it would either be, before we get to George on the CEO, I guess Kevin will come to your report later on, and Wendy, your report later on as well. So then what I will do then is turn it over to George in terms of the CEO report.
All right. Thank you, Stephen. I just want to reiterate your congratulations and thank you to Maz. He's been a great support, and I just want to personally thank you again, Maz. I'll just touch on a few things in the CEO report, and I'll take any questions. You'll see in the report that we had a virtual town hall on December 1st. This is a historical tradition where the CEO engages with the community. We thought it was time for us to do that. We had a 1-hour virtual with a short presentation, then taking questions. Really what I emphasized there was, especially post-pandemic, as we've emphasized in our 5-year plan, it's now probably more relevant in terms of our mandate than ever before. And we had a lot of very positive comments in engaging the participants. There were 260 participants. I was also asked to participate on a panel with Bruce Katz, who really has written about a new governance model to deal with big issues going forward. Really, the emphasis that Bruce made and I supported was the model that Waterfront Toronto has is pretty well the model that we're going to need going forward with the complexity of issues that local governments have to deal with. So both of those were quite successful. I think there were 300 participants, and that session was actually sponsored by the BIA, the Waterfront BIA. So I want to thank Tim for sponsoring that. The one other thing that I just highlight in the CEO report, you can read the rest. The inclusion, diversity and inclusion initiatives that we're undertaking that are also highlighted in our 5-year plan are a long-term mission for us. We have a lot of work underway. As everybody knows, we've had all the board members, the panel, the design review panel, and all staff have completed the Indigenous safety training and inclusion training. Also, my executive assistant and myself have gone on to the second level of that training, which is really about supporting individual groups, and particularly in this case Indigenous, but it applies to all groups that would face racial discrimination, and it really teaches you how to have tools to intervene when you see prejudice and injustice occurring. So that is something I will share with our Human Resource Committee, and we'll look at whether we apply that across the board or to selected groups. We also, on our mission, and I give Wendy Cartwright the credit for steering us to some work that the McCarthy's firm has undertaken with regards to Indigenous inclusion, and both Steve and Wendy joined us along with some staff to listen to the journey that they've taken. I think we are well underway in terms of building on what they've done, but it was useful to look at what others are doing. And I would say that we have a very aggressive program going forward to deal with inclusion and diversity. And, you know, this will be a long journey, but I just do want to thank everybody who undertook the training course. I thought the feedback I got from those who participated was very positive. So, Steve, I'm not going to go through the whole report. If people have questions, I'm willing to take them.
Okay, thanks, George. Does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask George before we move on? Okay, seeing none. So I did skip over. Kevin, is there anything in the open session that you want to say about the farm report?
Get it off. Let me get it off mute here. Let me just make a few quick comments because we're going to touch on a lot of these things. But we had a very long meeting on the 26th and went through a number of the items. There was 3 things that that are all separate agenda items here today: the rolling 5-year strategic plan, and then 2 capital approvals. We also did an in-depth dive on the 90% design stage gate, which we're going to talk about today as well. All of the strategic plan and the 2 capital approvals the farm committee is prepared to recommend to the board at today's meeting after fulsome dialogue with management. All I'll say here, from a liquidity standpoint, we're in very solid position. We're over $100 million of cash right at the end of the quarter, and I understand that same amount today. And we'll talk more in the closed session. And very pleased with the 90% stage gate report as well. We are on budget. We're on time. I wanted to recognize management for undertaking a number of cost-saving initiatives here. There's been a lot of cost pressures, as you can anticipate with this construction or any construction. I think management has done a very good job on identifying cost optimizations to offset some of these cost pressures. And so thank you to the team for that. And I think the rest we can deal with in the closed session.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. Any questions of Kevin at this point? Okay, great. Wendy, I know it was your first time to chair the HR GSR committee, and do you have anything that you'd like to add at this point?
Just a few things in the interest of time. We met on November 12th and we reviewed 4 items. We received a report from management on the governance and document review, the diversity and inclusion initiatives, stakeholder engagement, and also an update on the federal government board director search process. In addition, our committee reviewed and recommended for approval a form of mandate for the corporate secretary, and I understand we'll be reviewing that shortly. But I would like to recognize the great proactive efforts that have come from George and Rose on the diversity and inclusion piece, and also a thank you to Ian Ness for onboarding me and guiding me through this first step. And that's it from me, Steve.
Okay, thanks, Wendy. Does anyone have any questions of Wendy? Okay, great. So we talked about the corporate secretary, and now we're going to have a motion to discuss and approve the mandate of the corporate secretary. So Ian, I'm wondering if I could ask you to take over at this point and
Sure.
tell us a little more about this.
Sure. Thanks very much, Steve. So as Wendy noted, we spoke about this at the recent HR meeting. We are undertaking a comprehensive review of our governance documents. There's about 14 actually, board-related documents that we're reviewing. That's referred to in the report. It's in the materials. In the interest of time, we did not bring them forward at this meeting. However, the one that we are bringing forward is the mandate of the corporate secretary. We do not have that reduced to writing right now, so we wanted to do that in the interest of best practices, and also our internal auditors, MNP, recommended that we do that. So we wanted to address that at this point in time. The form that you have in your board materials is substantially similar to that which was recommended for approval by the HR committee. There were some comments that came out, and those were addressed and subsequently reviewed by the committee chair. And so I'm happy to answer any questions, but if not, there's the resolution, the form of resolution is in your materials. As I say, I'm happy to either entertain the motion now or to answer any questions.
Well, I think we should answer any questions that anybody has, and then we could go on to the motion. Does anyone have any questions about the mandate of the corporate secretary? Okay, well then, why don't we move the motion that the board approve the mandate in the form that's been presented? Could I have someone move that?
I'll move it.
Okay,
I'll
thank you.
second it.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, I'd add an item on the agenda that isn't before us, but I would like to ask for a motion to approve Jack Winberg as the new chair of the IREC committee. If there's any discussion about that, then I would just ask someone to move that and second it.
I'll move it.
Okay,
I'll
thank you.
second. I wanted to move it, but I'll second it.
Perfect, perfect. Okay, so.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you all.
Okay, well,
Welcome,
thank you,
Jack.
Jack. We really appreciate you, stepping up. So now I'm going to turn the floor over to the David Casturin show. And David, I think the next little bit is going to be taking us through a number of Waterfront Toronto priority projects. And I think the first is to give us that update. And then we'll go on to some of the approvals. So David, I'll just turn the floor over to you.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, I'll be taking you through lunch. No, I'm kidding.
As long as it's not through dinner as well.
So first on the list is just an update on where we stand on the projects that are under construction or recently constructed in East Bayfront, North Keating, and the Portlands. So next slide, please, Ino. To begin with, the stormwater treatment facility at Cherry Street. As you can see, the exterior of the building is, well, you can't see that, but the exterior is actually complete. At this stage, it is a concrete building, award-winning concrete building.
I was going to say, it looks amazing.
It's pretty spectacular, especially when you see it from the Gardner. The work on the interior is just about concluded, but we do have probably about 3 months worth of commissioning. It's a very complex building, complex equipment within the building that treats the stormwater. So that work will continue, but the building itself and the exterior work is coming to completion. Next.
I'd love to just chime in and add that the design of that building is by Pat Hansen of GH3, and she's a member of our own design review panel.
Thanks, Chris. Lakeshore Boulevard sidewalk pilot, that work is complete. So you can see what we've done here is the first stretch of Lakeshore Boulevard. This is part of the public realm project that goes with the Gardner hybrid and Gardner EA. So that work, Lakeshore work will continue in this light and based on this pilot project across the entirety of the waterfront, or at least from Jarvis Street to Cherry. In East Bayfront, Bayside Phase 2 work is complete. So we have completed the Water's Edge Promenade up to the edge of the Aqualuna building. We haven't completed it around the Aqualuna building, pending the construction of that by our friends at Tridel and Hines. Speaking of which, this is the beginnings of the T3 Bayside. So this is the Hines commercial building on Bayside Phase 2 is now under construction. As you can see by Eastern Construction. So just a couple of photos of that, that building. Construction continues. We're getting pretty close to being fully enclosed, and they'll be starting interiors shortly, I expect. And Aquabella is under construction. They've Hines have indicated, or Tridel's indicated, they've experienced a couple of delays due to COVID, and are now looking at spring, summer occupancy for Aquabella. In the Portlands, we have completed all of the cutoff walls now across the for the entire river, with the exception only of the east and west plugs at the Polson Slip and at Piers. And we have completed the excavation in the Central River Valley, the area in the middle in purple. Next photo is just a shot of that. This is the end of that excavation. You can see the cutoff walls in the distance. And the next slide, I know. Work is continuing. We have completed now the under drain, so that is relieving the groundwater pressure from the work that we're doing above, which is a sand bed layer. You can see here the liner installation. That's our risk management measure for the bottom of the river that will keep any contaminated groundwater from leaching into the river valley. And that is then covered with another layer of sand for protection. So that work we anticipate to be done in the next, for the Central River Valley, in the next week or so, certainly before Christmas. so that next spring we can begin the construction of all of the structures, the levees, and begin actual planting in the river sometime next summer. We have also started excavation at the east side of the site, so the Don Greenway up from the ship channel north towards Villiers and the mouth of the Don. So that work will continue over the winter. We are just in the process of doing final commissioning on Starex soil treatment. So these structures you see are actually essentially ovens. We will, or the subcontractor will place the contaminated soils, and this is for more highly contaminated soils, but contaminated with petrochemicals. What happens is that there are burners at the bottom of these structures that set the petrochemicals not ablaze, but to smolder. And that smoldering process essentially burns through the soil column in the space of about a week, and we're left with clean soils at the end. Any VOCs that are captured or that are released due to the smoldering are captured and go through carbon filters before they are released. So there are no noxious odors or elements released to the environment.
So David, is that like a one-time thing and then that's gone and the soils are now clean?
That's correct.
Okay.
We have completed now, this was while they were underway, but we've now completed the Cherry Street South Bridge foundations. So those are the foundations for the bridge that crosses the river itself at essentially the Polson Slip. Those foundations are now done, and next spring, summer, we'll see the Cherry Street South Bridge arriving from Halifax. The Hydro One networks overhead wires have now been relocated to their new towers. The towers, the more, I guess, square tower that you see on the left photo and on the right in the right photo are the new towers, and because we're raising the grades of this area and needed to get the towers really out of the ground, which they would have been once we started to put soil around them. So that work is now done. And as I mentioned, the cutoff walls partly are caisson walls, but the other sections are diaphragm walls. The contractors come back, and what you see here are the diaphragm wall, which is the cutoff wall, or sorry, the plug at the west end of the site at Polson Slip. And this is done through a slurry wall solution where the contractor excavates out the soil, pours in a soil or a slurry mix, and then puts concrete and reinforcing steel in and replaces that slurry with a concrete mixture to create these cutoff walls. And then finally, or not finally, there's one slide after this, we did have the arrival of the Cherry Street North LRT bridge, so the first bridge from Halifax, and had a bit of an event with the federal, provincial, and municipal governments all attending and speaking.
Well, that's great, Dave. We've got a lot of attention, the bridge.
It did. It was, I think, as I understand it from our communications folks, one of the most highly of our social media events. I think something like 600,000 people were exposed in some way or another across various platforms, Facebook and Twitter, including photos of from people all along the St. Lawrence River tweeting photos of the bridge as it went by. And here you can see a photo that will probably be reproduced many, many times over the coming years of the bridge with the city in the background. And
that's great. And David, could you just remind us again the completion date of the project if everything goes well?
I will, and you'll hear it again 3 times today, but it is March 31st, 2024, and we remain on schedule, in fact, a little bit ahead of schedule for that date.
Great, great. Okay, does anyone have any questions of David before we move on to the next part, which is the capital approval for the East Bayfront water pipes? Okay, seeing none, David, back to you.
Okay, so just
Yep.
Thanks,
Go ahead.
thanks, Steve. Sorry. Yeah, just some highlights here. This project is phase one of a two-phase project. Both phases are included in our 5-year plan and annual plan for 2021. However, when we went to tender on this project, the market pricing was substantially the contractor or the consultant's estimates, and we have not, or we elected not to proceed with the entire project at this time, essentially due to funding constraints. We don't have the funding identified and available at this point in time to deal or to address phase two, but phase two is not the key or the key piece of work. Here, the key piece of work is the in-water pipes. We have an obligation to get those completed so that we can fully complete and commission the stormwater treatment and stormwater management system for all of East Bayfront. And we need to do that in order to transfer all of those components ultimately to Toronto Water. We are currently operating a number of the systems in East Bayfront and in Keating because the work is not complete, and Toronto Water has requested that we deliver only a completed system to them that's been fully commissioned and is functional. So we are looking for capital approval for phase one of the in-water pipes, or the phase one of the in-water pipe system, which is our last component to allow us to finalize and commission the stormwater treatment and stormwater management system across the East Bayfront. I'd note that the Farm Committee did recommend this for approval, review it and recommend for approval at the last meeting. So phase one.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah, sorry. So phase one is the actual in-water pipes and structures to support them. Phase two is the boardwalk, dock wall reinforcing, and public realm components. We had hoped to be able to leverage the in-water pipes project and be able to complete the boardwalk and dock wall reinforcing at the same time. That's not, we're not able to do that, but we do have plans to do that in the future once we've identified and set aside funding to allow us to complete the balance of the work. Let's see, what else do we say? Yeah, once this is completed, all of the treated stormwater that comes from Cherry Street stormwater facility will then be able to be returned to Sherbourne Common. Well, not all of it, but some of it, in order to allow us to operate Sherbourne Common on the stormwater system as originally planned. And as I think you know, that stormwater is then used to feed the public art and the park water features in Sherbourne Common. Next, I'll try to speed this up. So just the location, East Bayfront, as you can see. I'm going to move you through this fairly quickly, I know. The location is in Dockside and Bayside, East Bayfront, right in front of Sherbourne Common. And essentially what we're doing is connecting the Dockside stormwater treatment or stormwater management system to the Bayside stormwater management system is what this project is about. Won't go through. No, keep going. Okay, you did keep going. So the work we're doing is shown here. This is the full system, stormwater system. Water is collected in East Bayfront, is sent, is pumped to the Cherry Street treatment facility. Some of that water is then discharged into the Keating Channel, into the lake. Some of that water, stormwater, then flows back into East Bayfront and into the pavilion at Sherbourne Common, where it gets a secondary treatment and then is flows through the park area. This is what the project looks like. So there are two pipes that are being constructed outside of the dock walls in East Bayfront. One pipe that takes water from Dockside, pardon me, to Bayside into the attenuation tank and then to Cherry Street, and then the second pipe brings water back from Cherry Street and into Sherbourne Common Pavilion. With that, we have to construct a structure to protect those pipes. This is a navigable waterway, so we've been working with Port Toronto and other authorities to ensure that these designs are approved and acceptable. And as you can see, or maybe not really apparent, but these structures will also in the future support the boardwalk and contribute to the public realm and the dock wall reinforcement. Just another view of what we're constructing. So the boardwalk decking, as you see here, will be part of phase 2. The steel structure and the pipes will be part of phase 1. Again, this just shows what the phase 2 work is in red and what that looks like. We'll keep going, and looks like in rendering. Ultimately, the full vision for East Bayfront is that the boardwalks will face or be across the entire Water's Edge Promenade. This is part of our overall master plan for the continuous Water's Edge. It also includes for a number of finger piers for boat docking. So currently we are completing the procurement for the contractor in terms of the phase 1 work. We have a number of approvals already, are working on the final approvals, and with the approval of the board, we'll be able to award the construction contract and start construction in the spring. Total cost for this work, 23.75 million, 17.9 in construction costs, soft costs of 2.2, and a contingency of about 3 million. We've included a fairly healthy contingency to account for the fact that this is all in water work and needs, is pretty complex undertaking. In terms of funding, the project is funded through land revenues as well as Section 37 infrastructure revenues. Will come from private developers' contributions. Those revenues are not secured yet. They are dependent on the private sector developers proceeding with their work. And as such, we'll be needing to borrow about $12 million for a period of up to about 3 years to bridge those revenues being received in order to get the project constructed. In terms of construction, we elected to go with a lump sum contract tender method. So that contract or that tender has been issued. We do have the pricing, obviously, as I mentioned, and we're just about ready to award once the board has reviewed and subject to the board providing approval to proceed. In terms of risks, approvals, lake levels, impacts the Water's Edge Promenade and the public access are all risks that we're looking to manage and mitigate through the project. The project is in complies with Waterfront Toronto's risk appetite as a moderate project. It's consistent in that completing all this work will allow us to actually transfer the operations, maintenance, and ownership of all of the stormwater treatment facility, management facility work to Toronto Water, and that work is, I think, is in the order of $75 to $100 million in total once it's all collected together. And then there's the motion for the board to approve. So if there are any questions or comments on.
Yeah, David, I have one question before I open it up. In terms of the 8.4 million from the 37s, have you looked at the new legislation and how that may impact that number, or whether those projects are expected to be under the Section 37 regime?
It's actually they're expected to be under the Section 37 regime because they've all been the project we're talking about have had subdivision agreements with the city concluded. So we don't anticipate there's any issues surrounding that, Steve.
Right. Okay. Does anybody have any questions of David before we go to the motion? Okay, David, you're getting away pretty easy. So we'll ask.
What's early?
Ask Matt.
I'll make the motion, Steve.
Okay, thank you.
I'll second.
Thank you, Chris.
Chris.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Okay, all in favor? Approved.
Thank you.
Okay, David, now on to the next project, which I think is the Lakeshore Boulevard East Bridge and Public Realm.
It is, and I'm going to give you a break from me and ask Julius to present this one.
Okay, great.
Thank you, David. Let's go to the next slide, please. So we're going to cover off today the plans related to the Lakeshore Bridge project extension and provide an overview of what's planned. So we'll go through the parts and pieces of it. We had previously sought and obtained approval for $16 million to do preliminary work by way of design. This is for the Lakeshore Bridge and the public realm extending to the east of the Don River. The delivery agreement was put in place with the city on September 15th, and we have not included this in the 5-year rolling plan as yet. That would be subject to approval of the board and ultimately approval of city council, which is pending. To put this into context, we show here the Lakeshore Bridge as it stands today. The plan is to extend the bridge 2 bays to the west or the left, and then prior to doing that work, we would now be removing the Gardner ramp overhead, which makes the work easier. Next slide, please. So originally, we planned to do the Portland's flood protection work by the extension of the bridge of those 2 bays noted. Under that scenario, we would have had to work under the live and active Gardner Expressway overhead, which is, in our view, somewhat dangerous. The Gardner EA, on the other hand, then contemplated us, or the city coming back, then demolishing the ramps after the fact, after we completed our portion of work on bridge extension, and then doing further modifications to the Lakeshore Bridge itself with the ramps out of place. Next. This shows the scenarios at the top. The 2 portions of bridge extension are actually shown in this case on the right side. We'd have to go back then, or the city would have to go back and replace the other sections of the bridge and then do further widening of the new bridges we install under that original scenario. Under the EA, again, I've touched on what that work would have been. Next. The big issue with this is that the original program would have broken the work into 2 segments with a gap in between, causing extensive disruption to traffic over an extended period of time. With the first program being completed over a couple of years, then a gap, then coming back. So through this, we compressed the overall program into a tighter schedule, minimizing disruption in the long term to users of the roadway. Next. With the work, we also will be completing public realm modifications extending significantly to the east. This involves installation of new public realm, bicycle paths, road modifications, and rerouting of the existing rail spur going to the Portlands to the center of the roadway, all part of this project. Next. This graphically shows, I think, very well the limitations of the original scope. The gray area showing the work that would have been completed under Portland's flood protection proper. The pink area then showing the work deferred. So this now combines the 2 into 1 program. Next. In a section, again, we're showing what these conditions are. As to the public realm, or where we are with the project right now, phase 1 continues. So with the funding the city provided, we have completed or continue with design, traffic modeling, traffic mitigation planning. This will continue through to June 2021. And we would be proceeding with procurement. Could you go back, please, 1 slide? Thank you. Phase 2 would be the construction work, which would commence in July 2021. It would be an extension of the contract with Ellis Don, sub-trades being tendered, the design team then monitoring and overseeing the work being completed through the contractor. Next. At this point, we're 90% through the design process. We've received comments back and made adjustments accordingly and are working towards issue for tendered documentation. We look to have that out for procurement in January 2021, again, subject to board approval and subject to city council approval. We would start construction proper in July of 2021 and complete the project. Well, I'll get into the scheduled completion dates afterwards. So we need the approvals noted. There are some permits that are required that are more extensive in this process, but manageable. So Transport Canada has input because of the water works, as does Aquatic Habitat. A TRCA permit is required because it does potentially impact the program, but we've got that process managed. A key piece are the environmental assessments. There are several that we need to tweak. These are not new EAs, but rather adjustments to existing, so we think that's manageable. And then we release for construction. Next. So we're looking for capital approval for this program based on achieving 30% industry standard design, which we've exceeded actually. The project is over $5 million, so we are seeking $147 million that we'll go through on the following slides. The budget overall is made up of 110 million in hard cost. We have expended or continue to expend the 16 million seed money. So incrementally, we're looking at a further 7.38 million in soft costs. Contingency was determined using HDR and the consultant team, as we did on the Portland's flood protection project. The taxes noted, giving us a total of 147.24. The 16 million added back in gives us a total of 163.24, but the 16 has already been approved. Next. Source of funding is through the City of Toronto, and we're looking for a further 147 million to complete the program. Risks, we have fairly normal risks for this program. So the 20-inch Enbridge relocation challenge remains, and we're working our way through that. I've touched on the environmental assessment amendments, so we have a process to address that. Regulatory approvals for traffic mitigation, that's been an ongoing process involving the city traffic, so that we find the best way through this, and we've been getting a fair bit of feedback through city councilors relative to how that's coming forward. The Gardner EA amendment is one of the EAs that we need to address, just repeating it here. We have our risks with utilities and have done our best to do locates and identify what those conditions are, but that will remain a risk as we run through the program. Cost sharing with utilities, we have now a better plan because we now know how they're behaving, and we've factored that into the program costs. Coordination of activities are understood, and this fits into the overall PLFP project. The completion of this project goes beyond PLFP marginally, or well, later into 2024, but does not impact the completion of the PLFP program proper. Lakeshore Bridge Toronto Hydro relocation again is a factor that we're managing. Next. Risk tolerance, we now see as a moderate. It's consistent with the corporation's tolerance standard. In this case, we think that we've addressed risk factors significantly, or materially rather, by getting the removal of the ramps done prior to the bridge construction below, so we're not underpinning a live bridge environment. And we move to motion. Any questions?
Okay. Well done, Joseph. Any questions?
It's Chris. I just have a fundamental question because I didn't have a lot of background on this, I guess. What's the primary purpose of this project? Is it to facilitate the works under the bridge, or is it in need of enhancement or widening? I'm just curious.
There were two EAs, Chris. So one was to deal with the extension of the bridge to accommodate flood protection.
Okay.
And that had limited result because with
About
the bents stay in place, and we couldn't complete the widening of the bridge. So the second EA would then remove the ramps, take the bents out, and allow the city in that scenario to complete that work. This combines the two and gives us a clean process through it.
the
Okay.
other
Thanks.
issue while it does that, Chris, is that we would be under the scenario of just doing the Portland Flood Protection Project, we would be working, as Julius mentioned, under live ramps to the Gardner, so doing heavy construction. It makes the construction more difficult. It certainly makes it less safe. And then ultimately, as we excavated the river below the new bridge, we would need to underpin those ramps, so spend millions of dollars to support a pair of ramps that are going to come down in about 5 years anyway. So it just seemed like a unnecessary waste of public funds to do that.
Okay, thank you. That's very clear. Appreciate that.
And Steve, it's Joe here. Just to add on a point of clarification, if I might.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just so I'm clear, and Julius, thanks for the presentation, that this is the work required to enable the flood protection work we're doing in line with the city's Gardner hybrid rehabilitation program.
Correct.
Yeah. So the city council decided to maintain the Gardner under a hybrid model, and this is the work that is required in a cost-effective way to ensure flood protection works with that decision.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. That is, unless the board wants to have the Gardner debate again.
We got enough on our plate.
Yeah.
Okay, does anybody have any other questions? Okay, great. Could I ask for Councillor Cressy to move the motion and Chris to second it?
I'll second. Thank you.
Okay, great. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're now, thank you, David and Julius. We're going to move on now. No, I think, sorry, did I miss one here or did we finish?
No, there's the 90% stage gate.
Right,
So
right. Okay, sorry. Okay, David, go ahead.
thank you. So highlights, and then I'll get into some of the details. 90% stage gate is the third major stage gate for the project. We did this at 30% in 20 Water's Edge Promenade in the public, 19, and then 90% this fall. Project remains on budget, forecast to be on budget at 1.185 billion, remains forecast on schedule. In fact, showing currently December 2023, our requirement is to complete by March 31st, 2024. There are a number of issues that have arisen at the 90%, primarily the realization of the utility cost share risk, and I'll talk a bit more about that in the presentation. That has impacted on the contingency balance that we have remaining, which is at the conclusion of 90%, $51.5 million in contingency. We have presented this to the Executive Steering Committee and to the Federal Government's Oversight Committee. The ESC has approved moving forward based on the analysis that we have done. And I would just note there were some questions from the Farm Committee around considering liquidity based on the 90% design stage gate. There is no impact to our liquidity based on the 90% stage gate. We are continuing to reflect an on-budget completion. In fact, our construction costs, as you'll see, have really not changed from the 60%, with the exception that we are now needing to fund some work that we had that needed to be done regardless. So I know, why don't we move on? So this is just the process. I mentioned the 30, 60, and 90% stage gates. So we have now completed and are at the end of that process. Next. I won't get into this, but essentially, or not in a lot of detail, but essentially the process involves obtaining estimates from our consulting teams, an estimate from Ellis Don. Those two estimates are then reconciled by our third-party independent cost estimator, Altus. Once that process has taken probably in the order of 5 months this time. Our first estimates we actually received in the early summer, late spring for 90%. So that reconciliation happened, also included, as mentioned by Kevin, a substantial amount of cost optimization to get to where we were able to get the risk consultant HDR to assess the risks on a quantitative basis to determine where we stand with respect to our contingency and our probability of completion. This is just the process to get us here, starting with the draft review or draft presentation in September, final presentation today to the board. Where we stand currently, we are for Earthworks Marine and Parks, 60% complete design, not 90, because the project is happening in phases. Some parts of the project are further ahead than others. Some parts are actually complete construction, while the parks and River Valley finishes were, when we completed this in September, at 60%. You can see that we're about 55% awarded at that time. That number has increased, but a substantial amount of the finishes work will be tendered in 2021 as those elements are constructed at a later date. Bridges, 90% design on Lakeshore. We are at 100% on all of the other bridges, awarded about 65%. In progress 40%, with a small amount yet to be tendered to complete that work. And from roads and services, issue for tender have been issued for all of the roads and services. At this point, construction is underway on various components. We have awarded 43% with an additional 36% in process at the time, so be awarded before the end of the year, and about 20% left to be awarded in 2021. So this is the summary that shows where we were at due diligence in the first column and the top row. You note on the right side, the estimate total of 1.185 billion is maintained across the board. At 90% stage gate, prior to utility cost sharing, we were in fact forecasting about $500,000 less in construction costs. So we were able to maintain the construction for between 60 and 90% with no deviation. Slightly escalated soft costs that I'll get into, and contingency that was more or less the same at about 75 million. However, we have been carrying since the 30% design a risk associated with utility cost sharing. When the project was originally budgeted, it was assumed that utilities would share in costs in accordance with the Public Service Works on Highways Act, which require the utilities to actually fund a majority share of the cost of utility relocations. Utilities have balked at that and in fact have rejected that. We've been carrying that risk for some time, and as of this fall, we have begun to realize the risk of having to pay for those utility relocations without reimbursement from the utilities. That has resulted in us essentially transferring $22.5 million, $22.7 million from our contingency to the estimate of completion as we have realized that risk, and the construction cost estimate has therefore been increased from 889 million to 911 million to account for that risk. Next.
David, what's left in the contingency budget?
We'll get there. Well, it's actually on that page. We're at 51.5 billion after the utility cost sharing. Risk has been realized. Let's see, as you can see here, this is the Enbridge number. So with the 51.5 million, one of the risks that hasn't been fully realized yet, but is certainly a substantial risk, is the relocation of Enbridge, which is estimated at 70 million. Obviously, if we were to realize that risk, the Enbridge costs would involve us exceeding our remaining contingency and exceeding the project budget. And in addition to as you can see, it'll be about 15.4 million over the 1.185 billion. Although that doesn't account for any of the other risks that we are still carrying contingency for. So it's probable or highly likely that the budget exceedance would be substantially higher than 15 million were the Enbridge risk to be fully realized.
And what's going on with the tendering in terms of construction costs these days? Is it, what?
We're seeing both positive and negative impacts. We have you'll see in our report on bless you report on COVID. The report on COVID risks. We've incurred some additional costs as a result of the COVID specific COVID impact on one of the subtrades. But it hasn't been. We haven't seen it translating into huge impacts on our tendering or on our project construction.
Good.
Okay. Next slide. So here I mentioned that the increase from 60 to 90 is 22.2 million, which is almost entirely associated with entirely associated with the utility cost sharing issue. You can see that the roads and services estimate has gone up by 22.9, and again, that's where all of these utility cost sharing costs affect the budget. Earthworks and bridges are substantially where they were previously. Thank you. With respect to soft costs, I think is the next slide. Increase of about 4.7 million. That has to do with some very specific issues. There were increased construction administration costs due to one of the subcontractors being substantially delayed on site and requiring us to continue to provide site inspection during that delay. We've also been looking at the design of the sediment and debris management area in quite an amount of detail, and we've assessed and addressed some geotechnical challenges in the roads and in the parks that have resulted in some additional soft costs. So now forecasting about $201 million there. Contingency perspective, carry on. Contingency at 60%. Last year we were carrying 67 million. Of the original 124 million, there was 67 million remaining in contingency. Next slide. Since then, between the 60% being completed and the 90% stage gate being completed, the contingency actually rose to 80 million. That was as a result primarily of two or three issues. One was the alternative design for the transit right-of-way. We had some substantial savings on one of our tenders. You can see $11.5 million, and we were able to fund some of the work that had been allocated to Portland's flood protection was actually reallocated the work itself to Cherry Street, Lakeville, to utilize the balance of that funding. Then at the 90% stage gate, prior to utility cost sharing, we had drawn down that contingency by about $6.5 million to 74, and we are now recommending, given that we need to carry the utility cost share risk as a realized risk, further drawdown of the contingency to 51.5 million remaining. And we're going to talk about what that means from a risk perspective. Here, you can see that at 30% stage gate, due diligence we had set at 90% probability of achieving target. 30% we were at 73%, at 60, 71, and now we're at 70%. So fairly consistent over the last 3 years in terms of our probability of completion. In order to go back up to the 90%, we would need a contingency of in the order of 72 million. If we are, we and the city are continuing to pursue ways to obtain reimbursement from the utilities for these utility issues. And if we're able to do that, obviously that money will go back into the contingency.
Work would have been. Next.
Just some of the top risks. In fact, the top risks are actually opportunities. The opportunity for obtaining reimbursement for a variety of the cost-sharing risks, hydro and Enbridge specifically. And then we do have our other cost risks, including disposal of contaminated soils. We do have a risk related to cutoff walls, cutoff wall contract, and a claim that's been received there, water treatment capacity, and some others. Next, top 10 schedule risk. These haven't changed. Failure to establish plantings is a key risk, so that is a schedule-related risk that we need to ensure that we're able to do the plantings substantially in advance of opening up the river mouth to ensure that the banks of the river are stabilized. And then the Enbridge 20-inch relocation is also a potential schedule risk. And finally, with respect to the risk, we are proceeding based on the center S-curve here, which at 1.185 billion shows a completion, you got to read up, completion around 70%. On the left, if we were able to recover that 20+ million from utilities, that shows where the probability would increase to 90% completion. I'm not going to go through all of the detail on optimizations. There are a number that we are still pursuing that haven't been included in the estimate of completion. You can see them here, either because we're not sure that the city or the authorities will accept what's being proposed, or the the details and the costs aren't fully known. But there are substantial optimizations that we are still pursuing, and in fact, many that we have already incorporated. I would note that none of these optimizations reflect changes in scope, so we are still delivering on the scope of work as defined in the contribution agreement with the 3 levels of government. What we're dealing with here are simply means and methods of construction or finishes. So we have multiple ways to do certain things. We can seed seed lawns, we can sod lawns, we can do many things, and what we're trying to do is optimize those solutions as best we can to respect and maintain the budget. Next. So we'll continue to manage the risk issues. We are laser focused on the Enbridge 20-inch gas line. We'll talk about that in closed session. And we will continue through the process to continue to explore optimizations and develop cost savings to return funds to the contingency. Thanks, Ino. I think that's it.
David, first of all, thank you for that presentation. And considering you're in charge of what people have told me is the largest infrastructure project going on in North America, I appreciate all your hard work, because from beginning to end over such a long period of time, it seems relatively that we're in good shape. A couple of issues. I have one question, but I think what I'll do is see if anybody else has any questions before I ask mine. So I want to open the floor. Does anyone have any questions to David about the report? Okay, seeing that. So David, I just want to know on that issue with the utilities, what are the chances or odds, or what is the opinions that we're getting about being able to recoup those costs? Because I'd certainly like to get back up to 88%.
Can I, Steve, that we raise that in closed session?
Okay, great. We'll do that in the closed session. Okay, so I don't think there's anything to move there. Is there on this?
It's not, just for information.
Okay, great. Okay, well, thank you. Then we'll move on. And the next item is Lisa to make a presentation regarding the proposed 5-year strategic plan.
Thanks, Steve, and good morning, everyone. While in the interest of time, I will take the plan as read, I would like to highlight a few key points for the board before opening it up for questions. The first key highlight is about the requirements to prepare this plan. Waterfront Toronto's Act requires the board to approve an annual business plan for the fiscal year beginning April 1st, 2021, on or before the end of this month. We're required to prepare a 1-year corporate plan annually, and then every 5 years, a 5-year plan. We fulfill both of these requirements through this rolling 5-year strategic plan document. And in particular, on the index page of the plan, which is page 125 of your materials, you'll see that Appendix 1 provides the 2021-22 budget funding and deliverables, which is our corporate plan. and Appendix 2 outlines the 5-year time horizon and overall outlook for March 2026. Likewise, we provide our KPI targets, or our key performance targets, for both the single year and the 5-year time horizon, and those are outlined on pages 172 to 173 of your materials. As well, we provide our cumulative actual to dates on those KPIs for the last 18 years. The second highlight that I'd like to make is, apart from some areas where we have doubled down on, and I will talk about those shortly, this 1-year roll forward update is a business as usual plan. It totals 372 million for fiscal 2021-22 and 1.8 over the next 5 years. It builds on our existing 3 strategic priorities that were approved in our previous plans, namely our priority projects, which are 814 million over 5 years, comprising largely our Portlands Flood Protection Project, which is fully funded by the 3 governments. Second is our next generation sustainable communities at 177 million over 5 years, which is largely our Quayside development project, again, fully funded largely from revenues. And finally, the third strategic priority is our signature projects at 333 million, which are our 4 aspirational projects that, while dependent on the success of our fundraising strategy, we are designing to be scalable in nature such that we can implement as funding is available. And we continue to do this while maintaining a 6% corporate operating costs ratio to capital costs, at least for the next 3 years. And our corporate operating budget for the next year is frozen at the same level as this year, which is approximately 20.6 million, with a staff complement of just under 100 employees. And while I mentioned it is generally a business as usual plan, there is one notable shift in this plan, in that in the outer years from 2024, when the Portlands Flood Protection Project is complete, consistent with an objective to become more financially self-sustaining, there is a shift to greater reliance on non-government revenues. In fact, overall, this plan is anticipated to be funded 50% from government and 50% from non-government sources. The government funding pertaining largely to the Portlands Flood Protection Project, and the non-government funding being comprised largely land sale and fundraising revenues being directed towards our Quayside and our 4 signature projects. I mentioned that we had doubled down in some key areas, and this includes in the area of re-emphasizing Waterfront Toronto's mandate. You'll see this reflected in the theme of this year's report, now more than ever, meaning that now more than ever, the work that Waterfront Toronto is doing matters. It matters in addressing the big economic and social challenges that cities like Toronto are facing. We've also doubled down in the area of diversity and inclusion. Waterfront Toronto's responsibility for diversity and inclusion exists not just in creating an inclusive workforce, but also in our promise of building an inclusive waterfront that belongs to everyone. To that extent, we've provided an overview on page 10 of the plan, which is 139 of the materials, on what we've done and plan to do with respect to both those dimensions. As well, you'll also see examples reflected through the document visually and in prose. This draft plan has been shared with governments and reflects their feedback, and our Finance Committee reviewed the plan in detail on November 26, and we've largely incorporated the feedback. There are some comments related to our KPIs, which we'll continue to address in future reports. The final highlight relates to the draft resolution, which is included on page 132 of your materials with respect to the plan. The draft resolution calls out the key financials in the plan, including 3 areas that are new or different. And I just want to highlight one of those, which relates to the corporate contingency reserve allocation, which we did adjust down to 30 million from 60 million in order to allocate a greater contingency to the Quayside development. Until we have a greater understanding of the costs related to that project, and we're currently undertaking cost estimation processes, as well as the associated revenues, we feel this is prudent to do so. Should the amount of revenues that are tied to the contingency be realized at a higher amount than forecast, then that corporate contingency reserve will be adjusted back upwards to that amount it was previously. Finally, as a reminder to the board, even after approval of this plan, all expenditure amounts are subject to the board approved delegations of authority, as well as the board capital approvals process. And assuming the board approves this document today, we will complete and receive final edits and proofreading, and then plan to finalize the document early in the new year. So Steve, I'll turn it back to you and the board, and be pleased to answer any questions.
Thanks, Lisa. Great presentation. Anybody have any questions or comments on this strategic plan?
Steve, if I may, it's George, if I can just make 2 comments.
Sure.
One is, as Lisa said, we have about 30 performance measurements, and that seems high, and that was pointed out by our internal audit. So we'll, as Lisa said, we'll be reviewing which performance measurements are probably material in the future, and we'll report back to the board on that. The other part that I'd like to acknowledge and give Lisa and all of our staff credit is we recently, the Auditor General published her report, which had a report back on our projects. And I'm pleased to say that she's acknowledged that 20 of our 22 recommendations have been fully implemented, and 2 remain, but they're underway. So we got a very positive review from the Auditor General. So I just wanted to share that with the board, and thank Lisa and our entire team for the progress.
Okay, that's
Thanks,
great.
George.
Okay, any other comments before we bring a motion to approve the plan?
Yes, Patrick has his hand up.
Sorry, who does?
Patrick.
Patrick, sorry, go ahead.
Great, thank you, Chair. If I could just ask, as far as the credit facility and what the expectation is for, what is the basis of the credit facility for this? Is it 90 million? Is it the current 40 million? Just what are we basing the strategic plan off of?
That's a great question, Patrick, and we do talk in detail about liquidity in the closed session, but I can make the following comment, which is that the plan assumes that our credit facility, or access to a credit facility, and the tri-government consent related to that will be renewed before March 2023, and it will be renewed at a higher amount than the current 40 million. The plan does assume we require a higher amount than the 40 million. The exact amount is to be determined, but it's at least 60 million in terms of our forecasts.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, can I ask someone to move the plan?
I'll move it.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. Seconded by Jack.
Seconded here, Steve.
Okay, great.
Yep, that's fine. Got it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so that is going to conclude the part of the open session of the meeting.
We look to have that.
We're going to move a motion to go into the closed session of the meeting, and once we do that, I'm going to suggest, I'm trying to figure out what exactly the time is, but I'm going to suggest that once that, I've got 9:47. So at 9:55, we would come back and start the closed session meeting and give everybody a chance to just take a 5-minute break. So can I have a motion to go into the closed session to discuss items 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15? Thank you, Chris.
I'll move.
And thank you. And I just want to remind anybody that any resolution closed session minutes.
Okay.
Thank you, Kevin and Patrick. And we also need the motion to approve the proposed acquisition of land from Infrastructure Ontario. Chris and Patrick will not be participating. Is there a mover and seconder for that?
I'll move it.
Jack will second it.
Okay, great. All in favor? Thank you. So once again, to everybody, to staff, as I said at the beginning, a tremendous thank you for a really, really difficult and hard year. And hopefully, as I said, there's a light at the end of this tunnel. And I want to wish each of you a safe and happy holiday season and a happy new year.